Okay. Hello. So it's really great to be here. So can we go on to the first slide?
Mark, I think you need to go to, yeah.
Okay. So this might seem like a very odd first slide for this talk, but it's a curious thing that when you enter the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, into the science buildings, that there is this plaque which commemorates the author of Travels in the Mysore and Fishes of the River Ganges. So the reason for this is that Buchanan-Hamilton managed to successfully publish Fishes of the River Ganges, and it was the only scientific publication that he voluntarily managed to publish in his lifetime. And it's a really good link, this talk, with the exhibition that's currently on at the Linnean Society, which is still life depicting nature from woodcuts to X-rays. And that focuses on all the different ways that nature has been recorded visually. So in the next 40 minutes or so, we're going to be looking at a mixture of drawings and dried specimens and prints, all of which have been used to illustrate Indian nature. But the lack of publication of his other work has really led to the variety of natural history work that Buchanan-Hamilton did being obscured. In this talk, there will be a bit of a focus on botany over other things because that reflects the nature of the collection here. But we are going to talk a bit about fish as well. And the fish will keep popping up throughout. So next slide. Yeah, so one of the reasons, along with the lack of publication for Buchanan-Hamilton and his wider natural history work not being well known, is the fact that he is actually known by 4 different names. So in this presentation, we're going to call him Buchanan-Hamilton, but he was born Francis Buchanan and became Francis Hamilton in 1816 after he retired from the East India Company. And he's also known in other circles, I think primarily ichthyology, as Francis Hamilton Buchanan. So there's a fair amount of confusion about who this person is, but they are all one and the same person. And I'm going to hand over to Mark now to just give us a very quick biographical sort of, so that you understand kind of who he is and where he came from.
Thank you very much, Claire. Is this working? Yeah, great. As I'm sorting out the PowerPoint here, I'm having to sort of switch between screens, and sorry about it, closed down one and had to restart it. Anyway, so Francis Buchanan-Hamilton, as Claire said, has much confusion because he changed his name through his through his career, but he was just to give it a very brief biographical sketch. He was born in the west coast of Scotland near Glasgow in his mother's estate at Bardowie. He stayed close to home when he did his first university degree in Glasgow, and then moved to Edinburgh in the early 1780s for his medical degree, which he studied botany at the Botanic Garden in Edinburgh. Interesting to note that his MD thesis was on febris intermittens, which is malaria, which is very prescient in his future career with the East India Company in India. After his time in India, he returned back to Scotland in 1815, and he retired to his father's estate at Lenny, just near Callander. This is number 4 on here. And he stayed there for the rest of his life until 1829 when he died. It was about 1819 when he changed his name formally from Buchanan to Hamilton, and this was to purely financial, in order to inherit his mother's estate. And since then, he's been variously called Francis Buchanan-Hamilton and Francis Hamilton, or Francis Hamilton, even within his family. So it is pretty confusing. Just to touch on his time at the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, he was there in the early 1870s, late 1770s, And he did his botany degrees in this house, which we call the Botanic Cottage, which was the main house on the Leith Walk site. It's now been relocated to the main site in Edinburgh, and it's our like 200-year plus connection with the great man and his works. It was in Edinburgh which he was taught by Professor John Hope, who was a very enlightened professor who taught not only the Linnean system of classification in vogue at the time, but also the developing natural system by Jussieu and the European botanists. So he really got a great grounding in botany and taxonomy, and was taught the ways of collecting plants and recording plants, which he carried on throughout his career. And we'll come to examples of that in the show and tell. And it was here in Edinburgh that he met James Edward Smith, the founder of the Linnean Society. And it was through Smith which the society gained the collections we're showing you today. Do you want me to cover this bit? Yeah. So after he graduated as an MD as a medic in Edinburgh in early 1780s, he spent 10 years on merchant ships sponsored by the East India Company, but not formally part of the East India Company, in various voyages in Asia and Southeast Asia and East Asia. But then in 1794, he formally joined the East India Company as assistant surgeon in the Bengal Medical Service. And it was from that time that his explorations were really blossomed. It was only within a year that he was sent on a mission to the Kingdom of Ava with Symes, who was a diplomat going to on the British diplomatic mission through Ava, which was then which is now Myanmar. He spent the best part of a year going around Myanmar. And in there, although he was the surgeon on the mission, he also collected plants and made records of pretty much everything from natural history to anthropology. He came back and was based near Kolkata, which is about where the point 4 is on the map. And then in 1800, after the death of Tipu Sultan in the south of India, he was charged with to do a 1-year mission going through the whole of the territories formerly run by Tipu Sultan, and to record the plants and other natural products, and indeed the way people were living and the anthropological natures of things, and report that back to the Governor General Wellesley in Kolkata, with the eye he would understand what could be done with these lands. As we will see soon, as soon as he finished that, he went back to Kolkata and within a week was sent off to Nepal to join the diplomatic mission led by William Knox, who was going to Kathmandu to spend what turned out to be a year in the Kathmandu Valley. So he was the surgeon on there, but also the naturalist. So this surgeon naturalist career sort of continues. After he came back from Nepal in 1803, he was at the Barrackpore Menagerie for a couple of years. And then after a furlough in the UK, he returned to Bengal, the Bengal Presidency, which is the whole pink area on the map around the number 4. And he spent the best part of 8 years going around the Bengal Presidency, surveying it, doing what we call now a statistical survey. After that was completed, he spent a very short time at the Calcutta Botanic Garden as the superintendent before retiring to the UK, where he was he worked. He took up the role of a country laird, but also worked up some of his collections, particularly the fish. Over to you, Claire.
Because of this association with the company.
Problem as soon as I switch. Yeah.
Okay. So, the association with the company and this market of Europeans who were keen to commission works from local artists has led to these works being called company drawings. And they're generally understood as hybrid drawings. So they're made on European paper, and you can see the J. Whatman watermark at the bottom. So Whatman actually had an arrangement with the East India Company to be their main supplier of paper. But then a big part of my research going forward is trying to identify what the rest of the process was. So they were using local artists, but were the local artists actually using their traditional materials, or were they moving over to European imports? So on the right of the screen is an artist very much seeming to work with traditional materials. So you can see the paint is held in little shells. And then 10 or so years later, on the right, in the artist, which was drawn in 1825, you can see that he's definitely using imported materials. And the illustration, the box illustration of his paint box looks very, very much like a Reeves paint box that is held in the Museum of London that you can see there. So Western paper, local artists, and what they were using in between is something I'm aiming to hopefully find out in my researches. Next slide. But right from the start, so Buchanan-Hamilton started his career in 1794, but from 1795, you can see in the series of quotes from letters he wrote to James Edward Smith, his friend, that he's very, very concerned that he can have an artist with him at all times. So in his first one, when he goes to join the embassy to Ava, he says he's doing all he can to find a draftsman. In fact, he wasn't successful, but luckily Captain Symes was, and Buchanan-Hamilton managed to use the same artist while he was on that trip. And then when he's working back and working as a medical person, in a doctor, and his first kind of posting in Luckipur, he's complaining that he can't actually afford to keep a painter, because even when he's actually just working normally somewhere as a doctor, he's always looking for new plants and looking at the wildlife and wanting to record it all. And then in 1797, he's very happy because he's just managed to engage a painter. And if we go to the next slide, we can see some of an example of the work. So here's the fish coming back again. And Buchanan-Hamilton writes about working with the artist to make these drawings of the fishes. And I was kind of slightly horrified when I first saw this quote. He says, "I am attempting to make him do the outlines with some degree of accuracy, and when he succeeds in that, I shall begin to colour." But if you understand that at the time, the aim of the illustration was to show the average for the species. So you're trying to sort of draw the most perfect example that you can that will represent the entire species, rather than a single straight observation of one specimen from a species, which might have slight variations. So when you're making working as a scientific illustrator, I'm very aware that this is you have a strong relationship with the scientist you're working with. So you're making the drawing and they're checking whether you're managing to show what they're expecting to see for that species, or whether the specimen you've been drawing from happens to have some idiosyncrasy that is not relevant to the species. So that initial drawing period is actually a very intense kind of period of relationship between the two. So they're very much collaborative works. And it also sounds like he's maybe sort of just starting out, but as we'll see when we actually look at the real specimens, these are definitely works by somebody who's very highly trained and really knows their materials. So the thing with the fish is that he continued to work. Buchanan-Hamilton was continuously working with the fish and having an artist illustrate the fish all the way throughout his entire career. And he collected over 200 illustrations of the fish. So next slide, please. And the great thing about these drawings of the fish is that in one of his manuscripts, there's a Latin inscription at the beginning of the book. And he actually attributes the illustrations to Haludar, a Bengal youth. And that manuscript dates from 1800 and is currently held in the Asiatic Society of Bengal. So that gives us a very specific date and definite artist. So we know that Buchanan-Hamilton was in 1800 working with the artist Haludar. So in the next part of the talk, I'm going to hand over to Mark, who's going to talk about the botanical collections.
That gone there. Sorry about the clunky changeover. I'm going to try keeping my thing mute, off mute. So the two parts of the botanical collections we wanted to cover, and mostly going to talk about Nepal, but I just wanted to talk about the survey in Mysore, which he did in 1800 for a year. When he was in Mysore, he'd used the collecting techniques, the recording techniques, which he had initially learnt in Edinburgh and then adapted to his time in India. And for all the plants that he recorded, he produced a description, but also an illustration and a specimen and a herbarium specimen to document the plants. And in Nepal, he had, sorry, in Mysore, he had over 100 drawings made in Mysore. He was able to work those up when he was in Barrackpore into a catalogue, and this is cross-referenced to the drawings. And when he came back to the UK in 1806, he gave those collections to James Edward Smith, and with the idea that James Edward Smith would work them up into publication. Unfortunately, Smith did very, very little with them. He basically just recorded, he published about half a dozen of them in Exotic Botany a few years later. And here's an illustration of one of the plates in Exotic Botany. The plates were redrawn by Sowerby from the illustrations, and you can see the direct correspondence between the drawing here of the utricularia produced by Haludar and the engraving which is in Exotic Botany. But really, to illustrate the story of how he was working, it's better to look to the Nepal material, because while he was in Barrackpore, he was working up the Nepalese material, but then had to stop about a third of the way through and just pack everything up, bring it to the UK and gave it to Smith. And so we have this snapshot of what his working methods were. We have all of his raw materials, if you like, plus some of his polished works. And we can see from the herbarium specimens in the Smith collection, here's a primula denticulator specimens. We have in the archives, we've got the species pages. Each species which he recorded, he made copious notes of the descriptions, where it was collected from, and the characteristics of the plant. And for many, he gave new names. The drawings, some of those were taken by Smith and published in Exotic Botany, and here the primula denticulator is given as an example. And in fact, this example is shown in the exhibition that's running at the moment. So anybody of you lucky enough to come down to London, please come and see the exhibition, and you'll see these in the flesh. The quote at the top just emphasizes that the turnaround was very, very quick. He got to Kolkata, but within a week or so had to set out off to join William Knox in Patna, ready to go to Nepal. And so it's pretty much almost certain that the painter he had with him from the Mysore times was the same one that he took with him into Nepal, and so that would be Haludar. Just to draw out a couple of things from this slide, you'll notice that in the final engraving there are some extra details. There's a seed capsule and a seed. And by looking at that and the herbarium specimen, which shows that there were actually two collections here, one collected in April 1802 and one in February 1803. The April one was the thing in seed, and the February one was the plant in flower. So the drawing was done from the flowering material, but the seed was added by Sowerby by looking at the herbarium specimen. So that's a really nice bit of deduction that you can make from this. And lastly, I'd like to just point out the use by Buchanan-Hamilton of the local name, in this case the Newari name, the indigenous people to the Kathmandu Valley. They called this plant Nekabuswa. And originally, Buchanan thought that this was Primula elata, already described, but then he realized it was a new species, so he struck off the name elata and put Nekabu. He used the Nawari name for producing the scientific name. And he did this for many species of his new species. He had about 800 species which were new to science, and he often used the local name in the production of the scientific name. But unfortunately, Smith disapproved of this practice, and when he did publish the name formally, he used the name Primula denticulata. So from these archives, which are all here at the Linnean Society, you can deduce a whole lot of things about his working methods and the way that he was recording and using local information. Claire.
The previous slide showed a full color image from the Nepal series of work, but quite a lot of them are actually not full color, they're field work. And a common practice in field work is to make a complete drawing, but only record part of the color. A couple of reasons for that. One is it saves time, and the second is it means you carry less materials with you. And so saving on time and what you have to take with you, but it's these and what you could call unfinished drawings, which I really respond to, because you can actually really see the artist at work. So if you look in the enlarged inflorescence there, you can see just how many bits of underdrawing there are. And the person, this artist Haludar, is really, really thinking every time he puts a pencil on the paper, and changing his mind. And actually drawing live plants is quite challenging because, the flowers tend to pop open or they shrivel up and drop off. So you're actually working really quickly and thinking all the time, and you can see that process. He's just continually asking himself whether that's the right line, all that kind of thing. And then actually the little detail on the bottom right of the screen corresponds to the top of the stem. And that's just a really nice place where you can see also part of the colouring process. So it's not just a case of mixing up brown and putting it on in one colour. It's really carefully built up of greens and then a bit of kind of ochre, yellowy, and gradually building up. So you've got really, really nice, subtle, true to life colour, and then the little lenticels have been added afterwards. So the field notes were actually then subsequently worked up into full color images. So on the left of the screen, you can see the drawing that was made in Nepal. So although superficially it looks like there's less information in that drawing, it actually contains the fruits, that lovely bunch of chestnuts just hiding behind the two leaves there on the right of that drawing. And a problem that can occur with copying is that sometimes the information is left out. So you can see in the middle image that there is just the outline of where the chestnuts should be, and then in the third version of it, they have completely disappeared. So next one. But it didn't always happen at all. It's quite rare that these bits of information are missed out or not passed on. So in this series, you can see that the full color image has been transferred really very faithfully and accurately and successfully. And next slide. So actually, I was going to hand over to Mark about this one, because this is about the fact that Buchanan-Hamilton wasn't given full access to all of his notes when he went into retirement on his return to the UK.
Yeah, so one of the striking things about Buchanan-Hamilton and his materials and his publications is that many of them were pretty much effectively lost. So we've seen what happened to the Mysore and the Nepal material. It was given to James Edward Smith. Some duplicate material copies of the drawings were given to Wellesley, his patron, the Governor General, and also to Fleming, who was the head of the medical board out in India. But those are personal things, because at that point the paintings he considered to be his personal possessions. When he was on the Bengal survey, he was very much doing these as a commission for the East India Company, and he had 2 official East India Company artists paid for and working with him. He made huge numbers of drawings of not only plants but also animals. And when he was retiring and coming back to the UK in 1815, he expected to bring all this material back with him, work on it, and then present it to the East India House in London. But the people, the officials in Calcutta had a different idea, and Lloyd Mora, who was now the Governor General of the East India Company, forbade him to take any of these materials back with him. So all of these precious fish drawings and many drawings of animals and birds were kept back by the officials in Calcutta, and he was not able to access them. So he was cut off from a huge amount of his own work through that process. Since then, they've now come back, and they're now to be found in the British Library, the Natural History Museum in London, and and Kew Gardens, to name just a few places. But you know, there are researchers working on these elements of his life.
Sorry. So just to kind of wrap up this part of the presentation of the PowerPoint, I thought it'd be really nice to see how the fish illustrations finally looked in the published book. And on this plate, we can find the cyprinus that we saw earlier. Can you do the next slide? So, yeah, the process of translating these really delicate watercolor fish images to the final printed book uses aquatint. And it's a very sympathetic printing method with which to translate the watercolors. So in this slide, it's just to show you the contrast between an earlier version of a fish, which was illustrated in the Travels journey from Madras to Mysore. And you can see the linear shading. It has a very hard edge to it, whereas the aquatint has this very subtle gradated shading, which can successfully, to a degree, translate color and the shading and things like that. I've tried to show that on an enlargement there, but it didn't show up particularly well. So the next slide, that's just to give you a very brief glimpse at what the difference with aquatint is. So I think in boxes 2, 4, and 7, you can kind of see the granulated effect that aquatint will give you, and that just allows for really subtle variations in shading. And next one, yeah. So I think the quote here says, so from all I can learn in Copenhagen, Copenhagen is vastly superior to London for publishing, and the expense is much more moderate and works of real science are more saleable. So in London, it says nothing will pass without a degree of splendor which puts the work far beyond the reach of the man of science. So that's because at this time, your only option for producing a colored published book was to make the engraving and then hand color. And that was a very expensive process. So I think by choosing aquatint, which was kind of in use between the sort of 1770s to 1820, Buchanan-Hamilton was choosing a slightly more expensive printing methodology or printing technique, but he was trying as far as he could to produce an affordable book, which both shows the science and also shows these really beautiful drawings that were made by Haludar in the best possible light. Next slide.
Yep.
And that's over to Mark.
yeah, we're just coming towards the end of our the PowerPoint side of things, and quite recently we found out that that Haludar was commemorated as in a new genus of fish by Rohan Pethiagoda. He was has a strong connection with the Linnean Society because he was given the Linnean Medal in recent times, and is a strong connection with the society, with Haludar, and also Indian botany or South Asian botany. You can carry on.
And then just for the last slide, I'm hoping that we can do this again at some point in the future. So the images here were taken from just from a pilot study where I've been using technical art history, non-invasive technical art history methods to find out about the pigments and working methods for 3 drawings from the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh's Indian art collection. And next year, I should be embarking on a technical art history examination of some of the drawings that we've been looking at here in this presentation. So I hope to be able to give you much more information about the working methods and the materials used. And that's
okay.
our
Thank you. So I think we can swap over now and start looking at some of the materials themselves.
Oh, yeah, can you stop sharing? Yep. Okay. Okay, Mark, need your sidelight. So yes, so we're going to try and have a closer look at this fish drawing in particular. So if Mark can show some side raking light is the technical term on the side, and I'm going to try to, can you move over a wee bit? Yeah. It's actually, I'm trying to show you the amazing gold pigment and not succeeding very well. We managed earlier. There, actually, I think it's just catching the light. It's actually very hard to see without the light, but there we go. That's it. There. Yeah. So the workmanship and the subtlety of the coloring. These little drawings are really very incredibly well done. You know, and that's what I mean by it might have been the first time that the artist was approaching the fish, but their knowledge of the materials and their use of the materials is just incredible. Yeah, we can look at another one. Let's see if you can manage the same.
So these fish these drawings also have the Bengali names on there. Oh, hold on. There we go.
Yeah, is that it? Yeah, there you can see the iridescence just under the head and along the belly of the fish. They're a little bit oxidized as well, which doesn't help with the silveriness. And then just to show the variety, they're all drawn life size. So there are some larger images on the page and some smaller ones, but they all have quite amazing detail, every scale drawn. But I also think that these linear outlines of the fish are actually incredibly beautiful in their own right as well. They're just
and
very
the linear
subtle.
outline. Yeah, there's a linear outline, just an innovation which Buchanan-Hamilton did at the time, because that wasn't a common scientific practice.
So this one this one is amazing for showing the iridescence there.
Claire, I think it's
showing
more
you.
visible if you kind of move the page around. It shows the.
I'm trying to
Okay.
capturing the light the right way there. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
there is one on display in the exhibition.
So, and then just to see the actual page in the book. So that use of the aquatint was very, very successful for likes of this fish, which the original of this drawing is in the British Library, and it's very, very dark, but you can really see how the aquatint kind of shows up the subtle gradations here, and that's our fish again. So there are just numerous plates. Another Cyprinus. I'll just give you a very quick glimpse of the variety of 200 fishes. There.
1822.
1822, yeah. And the illustrations were published as a separate volume to the descriptions.
So we have a few examples of his botanical works and the way that he recorded plants. And starting off, just to show you the dendrobium, what he called Epidendrum damunsutia, again using the Nepali name for this local name for this plant. Most of the things he drew, he had painted, were ones which didn't make good herbarium specimens. So the herbarium specimens they're usually succulent and don't press very well. But here, this Epidendrum actually does make a very nice herbarium specimen, and this is almost certainly the plant that was painted live and then immortalized in this herbarium specimen collected by Buchanan in Upper Nepal in 1802. And here we've got Smith's own writings to say that he received it in 1806. So have a look at another one, the other Pleione. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Most of his Nepal drawings are done one plant on a page, but here we have two. A Pleione orchid and also a Daphne bollowa. And Claire, you wanted to say something about this, how it reveals some of the painting techniques.
Although this one looks kind of full colored, actually the level of detail here, there's all this secondary information in this part. So full color, but you've got all the detail here, which when you copy, you can put onto the other leaves.
So you're on mute, Claire.
So sorry, there's lots of linear detail with secondary and tertiary venation here that isn't here. So it's also, although technically looks finished, it's slightly unfinished but contains all the information you need to create fully finished images. And
if we have a look at the herbarium specimen, which goes along with this, with the Pleione, you can say this was collected in you to mute you, I think. So if you mute you, that's it. So this is the herbarium specimen that goes along with this, with the orchid. You see it's collected in two. There are two collections on this sheet, but only one of them actually corresponds to Buchanan-Hamilton's collection, which is in the 1802 one. Interesting here that this is an orchid which flowers before the leaves. So the leaves appear later on in the year, and here are sketched in outline but not colored in, and because they weren't available at the time of the flowering material, there are no leaves on the herbarium specimen. But when we have a look at what happened when Smith published this in his Exotic Botany, and there you're going to put it side by side. Oh, you can do it like that. Okay. Okay, in Exotic Botany, Smith did published very few of Buchanan-Hamilton's novelties, but one of them was this Pleione, which were now called Pleione, but at that time called Epidendrum paycox. And this illustrates an interesting things that happen when the original art is engraved by the engraver over here, and it's not just a straight one for one. Do you want to say something, Claire?
Yeah, so if you look at the difference between the two, actually this has been missed out, and this flower has been reversed and put in the position of this one, just to make a neater plate size. And actually the size of the leaves has been slightly reduced as well. Not too sure about the botanical accuracy of reducing the leaf size. This transposition is still botanically accurate and just makes a sort of neater, smaller image, but just a very interesting change that has come about.
Great, thank you. Okay, and the last thing is the primula, which I showed earlier as the complete thing. The orchids were part of the groups which he fully worked up while he was in Barrackpore. So we don't have the species pages associated with those. We just have the very basic entry in his manuscript Flora Nepalensis. So a huge amount of data, unfortunately, was effectively thrown away. So here is the plate of the Primula denticulator, which I showed you the photograph of earlier, and you can see the added. You can bring this one. If you bring the so the original drawing that was prepared in Nepal, it doesn't have the detail of the seed and the seed capsule here, which he got from, or Sowerby would have got from the herbarium specimen that goes along with it. So yeah, you can put the herbarium specimen on here, and you see this. Smith has quite accurately said that the specimens which in label number 1 are from Naranjeti in 1803. So these are the flowering materials. So we have this one and this one. Whereas the specimens collected 1 year earlier in Chittagong, which is on the way to the Kathmandu Valley, is number 2, which is this, and this. And these are past flowering, and this has got some seed in. So it must have been material collected or taken from there, dissected, which Sowerby used to produce the detail that we're seeing in the plate. And just so that you can see the complete picture, here is one of Buchanan-Hamilton's species pages, where he wrote all of the detail about the plant. Every plant he saw, every species got an individual page, and there's over 1,000 of these he would have had over 1,000 of these pages when he left Nepal. So quite a lot of them are now gone, because when he had completed the Flora Nepalensis account, he threw away these pages. But we have, I think, over 500 of these species pages here in the Linnean Society, and they've got a huge amount of data, including the local name, as I pointed out earlier. So Helambu Swa, and this is probably the earliest record of local names from Nepal being documented. So it's incredibly useful, incredibly interesting historical archive, as well as a botanical archive, and linked to the artwork itself. Okay.
I think that's it. Yeah. I see you nodding. Great, thank you both. So I come back to my desk from handling the material to see there's 19 questions on the Q&A. So thank you very much. So I will try and take them. I'll start with the first one, and then I'll try and parse some of them. The first one is...
Can you switch on your video?
I can't actually, Padma. I seem to not have the capacity to. I don't know why.
1 second.
That's fine.
Can you try now?
Yeah, here we go. I'm back. So someone is asking, and I think that's probably more for you, Claire, might the shells be used for mixing? I think that refers to one of your earlier slides.
Sorry, I don't really know what the question is.
I think the shells that you showed in one of the pictures in the PowerPoint, were they used for mixing pigment, I guess?
Yes, yeah, they would put a little bit of the actual pigment in the shell and add whatever binder would be used, or else the paint would be made in a larger kind of container, and then just small amounts used by the artist. They're very handy to hold in your hand as you're working. So yeah, they're just very nice little useful items to hold paint in and work with.
Thank you. Great. While we're on materials and practices, someone asks whether regarding the initial background pencil sketches, did Haludar erase the pencil marks once the illustration was finished? Because we don't usually see signs of pencil marks in the final drawings.
No, that's why I love the unfinished ones. Because when you see the finished one, you think, how on earth did they make that? So yes, they're not, and sometimes, so the process was to make a pencil underdrawing outline in ink and then colour. And depending on what stage the drawing is at, how much of the underdrawing you can see. I'm hoping in some of the future technical art history works that some traces of the underdrawing might show up with infrared photography and things like that. So that's something that I will be looking out for.
Okay, there's quite a few more about for you, Claire, I think. So we'll just get those out of the way, and then there's a few botanical ones for Mark. Can you say whether the plant line drawings are in pencil or ink?
So yeah, well, the underdrawing was originally done in pencil, while the artist is making all of those decisions. It's really a conversation in your head. Am I making that mark in the right place? Does that look like the plant? Is it accurate? And once you know which lines you want, then they were outlined in ink. Sometimes people say pen and ink, but actually I think a lot of the brush mark, I think they were actually made with brushes, the very fine outlines.
Okay, and do you know what the iridescent pigment is that you showed, especially in the fish, I think?
Yeah, I think they're just metallics, but what metallics, I'm not too sure. That's something I'm going to be fascinated to find out when I do more, because you can use varying things for metallic pigments. Some things shimmer, some things are real gold, and some things are not real gold. So there's different metals you can put together to make the pigment, and exactly what they are is something I'm hoping to find out. Because
Yeah,
it's an
actually,
amazing.
Sorry, go on.
No, it's just it's a really, really beautiful effect.
Yeah, someone else says what was the silver pigment used, but actually maybe it's too early to tell.
Too early to tell, yeah.
Yeah, good. And then there's quite a technical question, but actually is about that kind of differences in materials brought by the Europeans, perhaps, or used by the Europeans and Indian. So that Isabel Whitfield says, so Whatman European paper, what other techniques and materials were used? As above, pencil, ink, charcoal, variations of European pencils. What variations, I guess, or how many variations of European pencils were used and supplied, and what would have Haludar have used before Buchanan-Hamilton kind of rocked up with all these materials?
All excellent questions that I don't really actually have the answer to at the moment. So again, that's a lot of things I hope to be finding out.
Yeah.
And I think the thing about the pencil is that Europeans didn't even have pencils at that point. So I think they're slightly later, maybe 1820s. So before that, it was pieces of graphite held in some other container, or had they had bits of string or something wrapped around to stop your fingers getting quite so dirty. But these are all excellent questions that I will be trying to unravel.
So Andrea, who is actually sitting right over there, is saying, I'm not sure if this is the case for these fish, but I believe that some of the metallic pigment to show fish scales on fish drawings are actually made up of ground up fish scales.
Ah, well.
There you go. Just throwing that in there.
No, that's maybe we need to do DNA tests on these drawings. Except that would be destructive, so we can't. But I think things like mica were used as well. So there are lots of different minerals and things. And I think that ground up fish scales ground up because, well, you can make pigment out of beetles and beetle cases ground up and things like that. So yeah, I believe that could be true. Interesting.
Okay, I'm gonna switch to more historical questions. And the first one is, do we know anything about who Haludar was and where he was from in correspondences? So I guess the question is, are there any sources that allude to Haludar other than the manuscripts that you have talked about? And Mark, you're on mute.
Yeah, so far very little. We know that he was a Bengali youth, but Bengal at that time includes what is current day Bangladesh. So we don't know whether he was, what kind of background he came from. All we know, he was a young Bengali youth, or a Bengali youth. Later in life, he's recorded as working at the Barrackpore Menagerie, and so, but there again, his name appears on paintings. So it's been quite some time. It's only relatively recently that we've actually been, with some confidence, been able to pin him down to staying with Buchanan-Hamilton throughout his career in India, pretty much, and being one of the two artists on the Bengal survey. But exactly where he was from, what he did after that is again shrouded in mystery at the moment. Hopefully we'll find some archival sources which name him.
And another one of Linnean Society staff members. It's great to see so many staff members on this. Lainey is asking, do we know if Haludar provided scientific illustrations for anyone else in his career? Or was it just Buchanan-Hamilton?
Short answers, no.
You don't know?
We don't know.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you.
But he did work amongst the team of artists in Barrackpore, so his artwork was being used for general recording within that group. But as going off with someone and working one-to-one, if you like, I don't know of any other example. Okay.
So there's a few questions also about Buchanan-Hamilton. Interestingly, there's a question, and you'll be able to answer that, Mark. Is there a map or similar of where the Nepal expedition traveled to?
A map, yes, we have in the archives here. We've got 3 maps relating to the Nepal expedition, which detail accurately where the route into the Kathmandu Valley, and we know that he was limited within the Kathmandu Valley for this entire time, although he had their local collectors go somewhat outside that. So we know pretty much his movements in Nepal. Yes.
One of them is huge, isn't it? It's big
wonderful.
Things. Yeah, it is wonderful. If you are looking for information on that, please check our archive catalogue online. It will be listed in the archive catalogue. Did Buchanan-Hamilton ever meet or correspond with Hodgson in Nepal?
No, because Hodgson was later. Yeah, so Hodgson was there from about 1820, and Buchanan-Hamilton left in 1802. So no, so they didn't overlap, and in fact Buchanan-Hamilton died in 1829. So they would have known about each other through correspondence, but not met. Sorry,
the questions keep coming. I'm struggling. I'm going
to stop it now because this will never stop.
Okay, thank you, Padma. I'm struggling to group them. There's a couple of questions about seeds. So first one is, how many types of seeds were collected and where are they archived? And then Gina actually asks whether there are seeds from the primula in the carpological collection that we have. So the carpological collection is a collection of seeds and fruits that is kept separate from the pressed plant herbarium collection. But I don't think there are any of the primula. I'm not sure, we'd have to check. This hasn't been catalogued. So, but do you know Mark, if any seeds were collected?
Yeah, that's going into a huge different area now. But yes, there's a huge amount of plant material was collected by. Oh no, sorry, I'm thinking about Gardner now. Yes, he did collect seeds because he sent seeds and living material from Kathmandu, particularly to the Calcutta Botanic Garden, to William Roxburgh, who was working there. And in fact, one of the archival materials that we have is a sort of a working list of all the seeds and living collection dispatches which he sent from Kathmandu to Roxburgh in Kolkata. So he did send a vast amount of material, of living material, if you like, but that wasn't part of the things that he kept himself. So that would have been separated, and whatever happened to those, some of them were grown in the Kolkata garden, because we know that they appear in Hortus bengalensis as living there in 1814. And some of that material was sent back to the UK to be tried to be grown here, but that was entirely separate to the records that he was keeping.
And someone asks, so veering a little bit from the fish and the plants that we've seen, how many birds in terms of species illustrations did he make? Were any of them new at the time? I mean, I think we don't have,
we have
I'll let
one
you.
bird.
Yeah.
We have one bird collection, the Kalij pheasant from Nepal. It was already known at the time, but his Bengal survey drawings, in fact, are the Arthur McGregor's working on that at the moment, so I don't want to steal his thunder. So I can't really give you any information on the non-plant drawings. I'm sorry.
Okay. And someone's just curious, do we have blue poppy illustrations as well by Haludar?
Short answer is no. The blue poppy Meconopsis is much more of a high altitude plant, and way beyond the area which they were able to botanize back in 1802, 1803. It was Wallick's time in 1820s when botanists or other collectors were able to go up to those altitudes. So unfortunately no blue poppies.
Okay, thank you. Robin Cross asks, are there any drawings from Myanmar, Burma, Ava?
Yes, there's an incredibly amazing, beautiful set at the Natural History Museum. Those drawings were given by Buchanan-Hamilton to the East India Company in Kolkata, sent back to London, and the East India Company gave them to Banks, and Banks also did very little with them, unfortunately, but he did keep them in his collection, and you can see them at the Natural History Museum. They're quite amazing.
And there's a couple of technical questions that I think I might be able to answer, or Claire, if you want to answer. Someone asked, did both Primula drawings, were they done by the same artist? But one of them is a drawing, and maybe Padma, if you could pin spotlight the camera again with the Primula. The big one on the right is a drawing, the other one is an engraving, so they're not two drawings. And in the case of the orchid, someone asks, did the engraver trace the original watercolor and then engrave it on the plate so that the printed image is reversed? And the answer is yes. So those two are done. There's a last question that we'll leave for last for you, Claire. Someone asks, in the meantime, I saw a name Naran Seti 1803 in one of the figures. Go on.
That's Naran Heti, which is the locality that the mission was based in Kathmandu. If you know Kathmandu, it's the part of the former royal palace at Naran Heti. And so there are many localities, or many specimens which are localized as being there. It's not where they're actually collected. It was where he was based.
There's one that I should probably answer. Are you adding the local names to the scientific names in your catalogue? The answer is we are starting to. I'm not sure that the names that Mark highlighted are in the archives catalogue. No. Then we definitely should, and thank you for pointing that out. But it's something that we're starting to look at amongst the team. So, and I'm going to take one last question. I'm sorry, Jane, I'm going to let your question go. A question from another Padma. Claire, are you writing a book or paper out of your research on the techniques and materials employed by Haludar?
Yes, so at the moment I'm working on my thesis. I don't know if the thesis will be published, however theses are published, and we shall see if there are any papers that arise from that, or any, who knows, future for the thesis in some form or other. But yes, I do want to publish what I find, hopefully.
Thank you. Sorry, I had to rush through these questions at the end. We've come to 15:03, so it's time to stop. Just to let you know that the recording of this talk will be available on our YouTube channel in a few days' time. And if this talk interested you, oh, I don't have a copy of it with me here, but Francis Buchanan-Hamilton and Haludar feature in our book of treasure called L50. There's a link that I've just posted in. It's a lovely little book, if I may say so myself, which would make an ideal Christmas present. So head to our online shop if you're interested. Some of the items on display, especially the primula, as Mark has said, and there's a fish as well, are also part of our current exhibition, Still Life, depicting nature from woodcuts to X-ray. And that's on until 28th of February. So if you are in London or heading to the Royal Academy, do drop in to have a look. It's free entry and we're open Tuesday to Friday 10 to 5. And then finally, our next Linnean Lens will be in the new year on Tuesday, 14th of January. It will be on Leonard Fuchs' History of Plants, which is also Historia Stirpium, which is also on display in the library at the moment, a lovely hand-colored 16th century work. And the talk will be given by Sachiko Kuzukawa of Cambridge University. So I just need to thank our two speakers again, Mark and Claire, for a very enlightening talk. Thank you very much for coming all the way from Edinburgh. And see you all next time at our next Linnean Lens in January, if not before. Thank you, everyone. Bye.